Welcome to Energized, a podcast brought to you by GZERO Media's Blue Circle Studio and presented by Enbridge. I'm JJ Ramberg.
I don't think anybody wants to turn the lights off or turn the air conditioning off or turn the heating off in the middle of winter. And so we need to have a unified approach on how we meet those demands, meet our responsibility to the environment and our responsibility to a safe and secure world abroad.
Over the last 4 episodes, we've been examining what a realistic energy transition could look like. We've looked at the macro-level geopolitics, the practical considerations, and some of the really important partners needed along the way. Today, we're talking about the potential role natural gas could play in that transition and how advocates from both sides of the political aisle can work with local communities to build a strong energy future. In this final episode of Energized, Enbridge CEO Greg Ebel is joining me for a conversation with Congressman Tim Ryan, a Democrat from Ohio. He served 10 terms in the House, and over that time, his state's relationship to the energy sector changed drastically. Ohio's part of the Rust Belt and used to be a major manufacturing hub in North America, but that industry slowly petered out over the 20th century. Since then, the energy industry swooped in to fill the gaps in Ohio's economy, creating new jobs in everything from solar to EV to natural gas. One major development on this front was the Utica Shale, a dense rock that lies deep under the northeastern United States. Back in episode 1, you'll remember we talked to Dan Yergin about how shales like the Utica can yield massive amounts of natural gas. Drilling and oil production from the Utica Shale began in Ohio in 2011, about halfway through Congressman Ryan's time in the House of Representatives, and he watched it revitalize the Ohio economy. Since leaving Congress in 2023, he's become a vocal advocate for the natural gas industry, and he talks about the major role that natural gas can play in a sustainable energy transition. Congressman, in the last couple of years, you've really been out there talking about the role that natural gas could play in the energy transition. What led you to take such a passionate stance on this topic?
It was a really interesting series of events. I did not do a lot of work in natural gas in my 22 years in Congress, probably for the first 10 years. And then it was with the discovery of the Marcellus Shale, Utica Shale, and coming into Eastern Ohio, where my congressional district was, that I really started to see and understand the importance of natural gas. I started to see a lot of my union members get jobs, potentially building natural gas power plants. And so it became this kind of evolution. And then I really started to see natural gas as a huge benefit for CO2 reduction as it displaced coal because of cost reasons and other discoveries and all the rest. So it was an evolution, and it was something that I felt like was one of those issues that we could have a really strong bipartisan coalition on. It could almost inoculate itself from politics because it checked all these different boxes from energy, meeting energy demand, displacing coal, reducing CO2, creating good paying jobs. I mean, from a political standpoint, it's a win all the way around. And so when I got out of Congress, I really wanted to kind of use my time to try to get Democrats to really understand all of these benefits.
When you talk about it being an evolution for your understanding, where were you before versus where you are now?
I wasn't anti. It's hard for people to understand when you're in Congress, you have like 500 issues that are coming at you at one time. And, you pick a handful, especially when you're in the House of Representatives, that are representative or important to your district, jobs, manufacturing. And to that extent, I had some idea of energy, but just didn't understand the power and the importance of, what a strong natural gas play. And I also sat on the Defense Committee, Defense Appropriations. So I really started to see the importance of us exporting our natural gas, not only being energy independent and have national security for ourselves, but to be able to export this resource to our allies who are hooked on Vladimir Putin's gas and oil and all the rest. So it just kind of all just came together, and it puts me in a pretty unique position to be a pro-union kind of, I wouldn't say hawkish, but recognizing we need a strong national defense and what energy plays abroad. And then for this natural gas to be sitting under our feet in my congressional district, it kind of all just came together.
Greg, you and the congressman are very aligned in your views around this, but when you hear him saying that he has all these issues coming at him as a congressman, and obviously energy is top of mind for you, how do you work to get more people educated and interested in this in the way that Tim is now?
Well, first of all, JJ, I just love the congressman's answer, right? I think he's articulated the complexity of energy transition, that it isn't just about the fuel source we're using, but, it's about jobs, union jobs, non-union jobs. It's about geopolitics, what's good for the country, what's good for our allies. It's the local economics. It's not like Ohio or Pennsylvania hadn't seen gas before, but it's a regeneration again and a rebirth again. So I think he's actually created that really nice all of the above. All the above politically, all the above sustainably, all the above economically, all the above geopolitically, and all the above for different types of workers in different places. So it's that kind of conversation. I think he probably came to it like most people. Yeah, energy, when we were growing up, we're young enough to not be right in the midst of the energy crisis. But yeah, that was a thing out there. But generally, we had all this abundant energy and we didn't worry about it and all that kind of stuff. And then that didn't happen. And places, I grew up in Ontario, Canada, and I think probably the Rust Belt occurred there the same way it did in Ohio and Pennsylvania. And you start thinking there's a connection between all these issues. And fortunately, we can take advantage of the gifts we've been given, in this case, a natural resource, to make it work for everybody. So for me, it's exactly the kind of discussion I think that's a powerful one and illustrative of where we are.
Yeah. And, it wasn't, as you were talking about that, I don't want to say energy has never been used politically, because if there was a spike, if there was a crisis, of course, in a presidential campaign, you're going to, stick it to the other candidate on that particular issue. But I think it's important when you talk about natural gas, hydraulic fracturing and all that, that research came out of Jimmy Carter's Department of Energy. So here we are, coming out of an era where we need more of these resources. Here's some technology. It was, I think it was privately and publicly funded through Carter's administration too, just to show there was a recognition of how important energy was to our economy, to our national security, and to consumers at that point, given everything that was going on. Now, when we're moving to renewables, it became drill, baby, drill versus, the latte liberals who want to have everybody driving in an electric vehicle and having windmills on top of their homes and solar panels and all that. And there's certainly room for that. I mean, and that we should move in that direction. But as we speak now, looking into the future, looking at projected energy increases and demands from AI, reshoring, manufacturing, and all the rest, to me, it is abundantly clear that natural gas has to be foundational to what we need to do here to be a thriving society. And I don't think anybody wants to turn the lights off or turn the air conditioning off or turn the heating off in the middle of winter in New England. And so we need to have a unified approach on how we meet those demands, meet our responsibility to the environment and our responsibility to a safe and secure world abroad.
Since he left the House of Representatives, Congressman Ryan has become a co-chair for an organization called Natural Allies for a Clean Energy Future. Its goal is to educate people about how natural gas and renewable energy can work together to accelerate our path to an affordable, reliable energy transition. Congressman Ryan recognizes the tension between conservation and the increasing demand for energy, but he does feel like we've made a good start. He's seen Ohio reduce CO2 emissions by 50% since switching from coal to natural gas. He's a Democrat, but for him, it's not about taking sides. It's about tackling the climate crisis in a pragmatic way.
We have our dust-ups with sometimes people who, want the solar panel everywhere tomorrow without a real recognition of what the economy looks like. But part of the argument that we make too is that when you look at where we want the country to go, we spent 40 or 50 years trying to reshore jobs here, manufacturing jobs, because through globalization and automation, we've lost so many, millions and millions of jobs. And we're now finally starting to reshore chip manufacturing, building electric vehicles, batteries, all of these things. High-end stuff, good stuff. This is what we should be making, advanced manufacturing. You look at artificial intelligence. When you look at it, you get past a little bit of the fear on it. what it can do to solve healthcare problems, what it can do to help educate our kids, what it can do to help government run more efficiently and effectively to serve the constituents and the consumers. Unfortunately, that demands a lot of power. So if we want to reshore and we want to dominate the industries of the future and we want to do what AI can potentially unleash in our society, it demands a lot more energy. I mean, there's projections anywhere from 12 to 20 times the amount for an AI search versus a normal traditional Google search. That's a lot of energy, which is why we're seeing a lot of data centers being built, which in up our way, a lot of good paying union jobs are building these data centers in Ohio. And so we see the benefits of that. And I think AI will help us also solve some of our climate problems too. But you've got to be on the cutting edge of these technologies. You can't cede it to China or Russia. And so that's where we try to explain to some of the purists that it's much more complicated, like Greg said earlier, that this is a multifaceted issue, but one we have to be strong in and we have to maintain our dominance in. And we have a 200-year supply of natural gas. So what are we waiting for here?
What's changed? Because often in politics or in business, people want to see things in black and white. And as we've been talking about, the answer is always in the gray area. So what's happened recently where it seems like you're able to get to the gray area more with people?
Well, I think people pushed so hard in one direction. And look, there's always benefits in that too. Like we had to move. We had to have a different, I think, mindset of how we thought about climate change and what our response was going to be. And China was dominating the electric vehicle market. We had to move and try to, match them to some extent in that area. But I think with that huge step, I think there has become a reality that is like, okay, we, with what we're doing with wind and solar, cannot come anywhere close to meeting the demand that we have in this country. And I think reality has started to set in, just like any other pendulum that swings. It swung. There were some benefits from that swinging, and now it's moving back into reality, and people are starting to see it. And when you're freezing in New York City, or a pastor we work with who says he pays $6,000 every couple of weeks in energy costs to heat his church in Harlem, they say, well, this is not working. And so we heard what everyone was saying, and we kind of agree with it, but we don't have $100,000 to retrofit our church. We don't have hundreds of thousands of dollars to put solar panels on our church. And that's not going to work for us. So I think the short answer is reality started setting in and people started to be open to the conversation more so than a few years ago.
Super local issue too, right, JJ? I mean, when I think about, climate change writ large is a global issue. Say the Iran-U.S. nuclear deal or something like that, right? Those are hard for the average person to click in. But if you're, as you said, a pastor that's got a bill, or you're a union head and you can see the need for trades in places that didn't exist, or you're a small business, or you can see the benefits of, say, building a pipeline or a power facility happening right in your community. And remember, a lot of this is linear infrastructure. So every 30 or 40 miles, you'll have various stations pushing gas, or, it could be different sources or even electric. These are fabulous jobs. So I think it's one of those issues that's very personal. People are smart. It's a kitchen table issue. Wow, my gas bill has stayed relatively flat. Other bills have gone up. Why is that, right? Let's use more of that. So I think that personal side is really interesting.
Yeah, for sure.
I do want to talk about one of the elephants in the room, though, because we know that natural gas will eliminate emissions, but there's a reason that people are worried, and that reason is methane. So, Greg, what do you do from the business side to address those concerns?
Well, there's a lot going on that front. Congressman just talked about AI. We're already using AI, predictive analytics, to make the infrastructure that we have more safe from that perspective, right? So we reduce the amount of methane emissions that, from a pipeline perspective is relatively small in the grand scheme of things. But just if we can predict when there's going to be an issue, you can avoid some emission from happening. When you can predict and put in new valves, et cetera, you can prevent as much methane. When you can use other sources, all of the above sources, to move the gas. So gas gets moved by compressing, it gets pushed by an engine. We're increasingly using things like solar self-power in the areas that we have to actually move that gas, right? That can blow people's minds, but you're actually using less fossil fuels to push natural gas because you're actually using solar and things like that. So just a company like Enbridge alone, we are spending between 2024 and 27 about $3 billion solely on modernization, improving the way these assets work so that they actually let less methane escape. And let's put it down to an economic perspective too. That is the product that we're shipping. Everybody wants to, whether it's celery or natural gas, you want to keep as much of the product that's being produced as part of your system to get to the ultimate customer. So those are big changes that are happening. So an all of the above approach, even in the way that we run existing conventional energy assets, the idea, I would say, 10 years ago of telling traditional infrastructure players to use renewable assets to actually operate their conventional assets would be seen as crazy. And now there's a company like ours where we do it all the time, right? In fact, that's a big part of our business. And so I think it's little things along the way, JJ, that I think actually are going to make a big difference when you think about it in scale.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting, and I kudos to Greg and all these kind of really progressive leaders who have made that a point to do that, because there are some in the industry they're not leading on it like they probably should be, and so kudos to those who are, because it's really important, because you see how much sense it makes when they do it, and we've seen a 37% reduction in methane from the natural gas industry when you also saw a 40% increase in production. So it's clear that the leaders in the industry are really trying to figure this thing out. And I think it's important for people to understand too, and I didn't know this until, a few months ago as I sat with some of our partners at Natural Allies talking about this. If the gas industry had to build a new, infrastructure for getting natural gas and distributing natural gas, it would be much different than the one they have now. And that's why Greg and his companies has to put $3 billion into getting it to do what they need it to do. It would be built completely different. And I think from a policy perspective, the one issue that we just continue to just try to wrestle with is the issue of permitting reform. That's the number one policy issue for both the natural gas industry and the renewable industry, because everybody needs, whether it's transmission lines or gas lines. And so, figuring out, again, this should be a bipartisan coalition here of American leaders saying this is how we move forward. But the reality is that you can't say, well, we just want pipelines and we don't want transmission lines. And the other side can't say we just want transmission lines and we don't want new pipelines. It's like we all need this. That's reality. Can we live in reality? And let's move forward together. And that's why, just as a side note, I think it's so important to hear Greg and Alan Armstrong and Toby Rice and others talk about the importance of the partnership between natural gas and renewables. It's all of the above. It's like, this is the partnership that should be the arsenal of energy for the United States of America to keep us strong, keep our manufacturing base strong, our economy strong, and help our allies. So stop with the partisan red shirt, blue shirt stuff, and let's all have the red, white, and blue shirt on.
For companies, though, Tim, who are not moving ahead as quickly as some of the other ones that you mentioned, what can we do from a policy perspective to move them along? And this is a question for you too, Greg. So how do you stand as an example for other companies?
Sometimes you got to have carrots and you got to have sticks. I'm way more in favor of carrots to incentivize, businesses to do things. But look, if you're not moving in that direction, there's got to be a conversation of what makes sense. It's not to punish. And I think this is where some of the rhetoric gets way too heated. It's not to punish. It's not to hurt. It's not to damage. It's to move us in the direction that we need to go in to be, responsible corporate leaders. And I think you definitely got to sit down with all of the parties involved. And again, get back to a culture in this country where we talk to each other, where we try to hammer out. Nobody's going to get everything they like. But, I think the more leadership that Greg and these guys are showing, the easier it becomes to go to others and say, look, these are the companies that are thriving. We're not quite sure why you're not doing it, but we're going to have to, in the interest of the public, move you along.
Well, and I think things like the Inflation Reduction Act, you can like some of it, all of it, or none of it. It's way more driven by carrots, right? And so big, responsible companies are interested not only providing a great service to their customer and doing it in a socially responsible way, but making money. And frankly, the IRA provides some opportunities for that if you have an all of the above attitude. Secondly, I think the big companies, the Exxons and Shells and BPs, these are all members of organizations that know that the weakest link, some operator that is not being responsible, actually hurts the entire industry. The American Gas Association gets that. The Interstate Natural Gas Association gets that. And even the renewable businesses see it. They need responsible setup of conventional infrastructure to sell their product. I mean, most of our customers like it that we can also provide natural gas backup. So I do think there's an element of moral suasion. And then, of course, most of these are large public companies. So let's face it, the capital markets today can be quite brutal on players that don't operate within societal norms. And I think not acting in a manner that serves your communities long term is probably not going to help you in the stock market. Yeah, people can get away with stuff in the short term, but in the long term, you have to make money. But you also have to do it in a way that is sustainable, responsible, and that's not going to hurt your workers and communities. So I do think most players are there, and those that aren't, they're going to get taken out or squeezed out.
Let's talk about those workers and communities. This episode is set to be released on October 31st, which is just a few days before the U.S. presidential election. And the last few elections were largely shaped by working class voters. So whoever wins this election is going to have to maintain an ongoing conversation with those workers. Tim, let's start with you. How do you think the voices of workers in manufacturing and industrial sectors could shape energy policy?
I think they've always been the backbone of the economy. I mean, the energy workers, again, even in industrial states like mine, not necessarily just in the South, have been a huge part of it. But I think this election in particular, given what's still polling as an economic squeeze, it's important for people to recognize that there's a trauma in the DNA of the American worker from the last 30, 40, 50 years that is still there. So even when you have a good job in Youngstown, Ohio, you are looking over your shoulder thinking something bad's going to happen, because that has been the history of this community. And it's not just Youngstown. It's the industrial belt up to Milwaukee. It's down the East Coast. When you look at the textile industry, or up into New England, all the different phases of manufacturing that we've had. So there's a trauma in the American worker DNA right now that is still alive and well. And the candidates that speak to that, whether it was Barack Obama over Mitt Romney, or Donald Trump over Hillary Clinton, or Bill Clinton over George Herbert Walker Bush, the candidates that really connect to that anxiety are the ones who win. We do have 800,000 new manufacturing jobs. The infrastructure bill that Trump was not able to pass, the CHIPS Act, which in Ohio we have Intel locating here, that's going to be almost $100 billion investment into chip manufacturing, which we haven't had in this country for 30 or 40 years. In the electric vehicle manufacturers, battery plants in Youngstown, where I'm from, 2,000 union workers. If she can make that argument to those working class that we've got a long way to go, we know you still feel anxious, but we put a down payment on rebuilding the manufacturing base in the country, that's going to be good. But let me say, since we're talking about this issue, those workers know that energy costs for manufacturing is a key component of them being able to continue to do this. And so I just think there can't be a disconnect there. You can't talk about manufacturing. You can't talk about rebuilding the country and be anti-natural gas. It just doesn't jive in the average person's mind. When Biden put the pause on LNG exports, I thought that was basically kneecapping his own American competitiveness strategy. And I hope that she can navigate that and realign that position, because if you say we need natural gas so we can build stuff, we need natural gas in conjunction with renewables so that we can dominate the world economy, so that we can have natural security. And she's changing her position on that. And that's fine. As long as you're changing your position to make America stronger, no voter will care. So I hope that's how she connects to the working class.
How do you think labor unions are going to influence the energy evolution?
Well, the labor unions need to be a big part of this conversation, because when you look at most unions, most organized labor unions in the private sector that do energy work, they usually do all of it. They don't just do one area. They don't just do natural gas. They do wind, they do solar, they do component parts, they do assembly. So when you look at the building and construction trades, they're very supportive of all of the above, smart grids and all of these new evolutions. So I think the more organized labor supports and speaks up about all of the above strategy, the more you're going to see political candidates, especially on the Democratic side, support on all of the above strategy.
It's interesting, JJ, because Tim and I might have some different politics, but I think we're entirely agreed on the impact of unions, and we see it. And for me, obviously, we use unionized and non-unionized employees. Depends on where you're working and operating. But there's two or three things that I really find the union players all have. First of all, as Tim says, they are, whether it's factories, whether it's pipelines, whether it's refineries, they're everywhere. They have a great nose for BS, right? So they can tell when politicians are giving them the gears or not, and whether they're changing their position, whether that's appropriate or not. And why is it? They are on the ground everywhere where we are. They're in the communities. They're working with first responders. They're working with management teams. They're working with local politicians or our local politicians. They are in the community. And, the people's house is closer to people in the community. The Senate's a little further away, and the executive branch even further away. Not right, not wrong. That's just a reality. Unions are right there on the ground. And so we see them, and it's the third area where I find them really powerful. They are literally coming out to public meetings and talking about these projects, right? What it means to their community, what it means to their workers, what it means to their local, what it means to their families and the schools and everything. That's incredible, because in a world of a lot of activism and paid activism, they're not really paid activists. So I'll tell you, they're great with politicians, because they'll go see Republicans and they'll go see Democrats. I mean, you see that at the two conventions, right? You have folks from both sides. Again, not right, not wrong, just different. But it has always been a powerful source of no BS on the ground and really influence. And even international issues. There's a great issue, a pipeline between Canada and the United States called Line 5, very political. The unions have been really powerful in influencing the Biden administration. That's an oil pipeline, not a gas pipeline. And the Trudeau administration, not always the most friendly towards conventional energy, but the unions have played a powerful source. So they've got a really unique role in this energy evolution, because they're there with other people around the kitchen table figuring out what makes the most amount of sense today in our community where we are now.
Amen.
I want to wrap this up with one last question. This podcast is all about how we can create an energy future that is sustainable, it's secure, it's practical, and it's profitable. Congressman, I'll start with you. What do you see as the key ingredient in that future?
I think building this coalition, what we're trying to do at Natural Allies, working with Greg and his team, and just having that's what we've tried to broaden it out. It's progressive CEOs. It's, more moderate, pragmatic, democratic leaders from all over the country, white, black, male, female, with unions who work in the industry. And as we move out to Congressional Black Caucus, Congressional Hispanic Caucus, we have a pretty ambitious agenda here of really trying to grow this coalition. And I think when you get that coalition, then you're going to be able to send union members to talk to members of Congress. You're going to be able to send, black leaders in the gas industry to go talk to members of the Congressional Black Caucus. We're going to have real data about prices and all of these things, and then eventually the Hispanic Caucus as well. So I think the key is going to be building an American coalition that looks like America, that is both business and labor, moving forward. And if you have that, then you have the coalition. Politics is all about coalitions. There's no one group that gets everything they want, but if you get a coalition of people going to a group of leaders, you make it really easy on the leaders to do it. There's a great story about Franklin Roosevelt, and I forget what social issue that people were in his office pushing him on, and he said, "Make me do it." He said, "Go out there and rally the troops and protest and get out in front of the White House. I want to do it, but right now, politically, I can't do it. Make me do it." And I think we want to be in a position where we make it very easy for the leaders to do it.
Greg, you have anything to add?
Yeah, well, look, I'd just say, consistent with what Tim said, let's meet people where they are in their transition. We're all on different parts of this path, right? And nobody's a villain, nobody's a hero. We're on different elements. And whether it's a wealthy community or a poor community, whether it's a community going through transition from traditional industry or new, we have to meet them where they are. That's one. Two, let's take the easy wins. We often forget one of the huge elements of energy transition is efficiency, right? Turn off the lights and all those other kinds of things. Insulate the homes, all that. That is huge impact. And you don't have to go through the really heart-wrenching issues, some of which we've talked about in terms of changing an entire fuel source, if you will. And then last one, let's be adaptable, right? Our positions are going to slightly change. Realities are going to kick in. We're going to have the Putins of the world causing us grief. Let's make sure we're adaptable. We know where we're going. We're in different parts along the trail. We will get there if we cooperate. Convinced of that.
Greg, Tim, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That was Tim Ryan, former congressman from Ohio and leadership co-chair of Natural Allies for a Clean Energy Future, and Greg Ebel, the CEO of Enbridge. And that was our final episode of Energized. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm JJ Ramberg. To hear more episodes from this series, subscribe to Energized, the future of energy, wherever you get your podcasts, or visit gzeromedia.com/energized.
Energized, the future of energy, is produced by GZERO's Blue Circle Studios for Enbridge. To learn more about partnership opportunities with GZERO, head to gzeromedia.com/advertise.